This story is brought to you by HelloDearReader.com.
An ancient monster living underground takes an interest in a runaway girl. What could go wrong? Is he a friend, or does he have other dark plans for little Sophie? Part 1. I reached out to grab her delicate wrist, but I was too late. I grasped the air, and for several moments she hung suspended high above the plaza, and then she fell. Fear etched on her face, her eyes wide. Was it fear of falling and dying, or was it fear of me? It was never supposed to have ended like this. I could have prevented it from coming to this. If only. I remembered when I first met her. She had run away from home. Barely a young teen girl, yet there she was huddled inside the dark drain in my park. She thought she was safe hiding there, but she could not see me hidden deeper in the darkness. She especially was not able to see the foul others. The others hungered, and she was fresh, young, and alone. I growled a warning for them to leave her alone. She was not to be dinner for those filthy creatures. They feared me more than the eternal hunger that gnawed their cursed insides. I was a monster even to the other monsters of this place. This was my domain. I patiently watched as she cried herself to sleep. These humans were fragile creatures. I saw her small body shiver in the cold. She would be ill by morning if she didn't find warmth tonight, but there was no warmth to be had in my dark domain. We only knew the cold. Silently I crept up to her and placed a worn bed sheet over her to keep back the cold night. I put the least stale food that I had beside her. I waited in the deep shadows of the drain and watched her sleep. Realizing that she was no longer their dinner, the others lost interest and left to scavenge for food somewhere else. She woke when the sun breached the horizon. At first, she was alarmed and confused about where she was. Then she noticed first the bed sheet and then the food. She wrapped herself tightly in the dirty rags and ate the wrapped cakes, keeping a watchful eye inside and outside the drain. I could see she was afraid, but hunger and cold overrode the fear. When she finished, and the sun warmed the air enough for her to shed the sheet, she peered into the blackness of my home. She called out. After hearing no answer from me or the others, she thanked me without knowing I was there. I found myself keenly interested in her. I am unsure even today why, but that interest would seal both our fates. I kept tabs on her movement around the park that day. After eavesdropping on a conversation with another of her kind, I discovered her name was Sophie. The poor child was having problems at her home, which explained her intrusion into my domain the night before. It also explained the now visible bruises that could be clearly seen on her small arms. Those bruises made me feel something I had not felt in a long time. As darkness crept upon the park once again, I was expecting my young visitor to return to the entrance of my world. I was slightly disappointed when an automobile, driven by a blonde adult woman, pulled into the parking lot. She resembled Sophie, sharing the color of her eyes and hair. Sophie responded with dread when the blonde woman called her name. It became apparent that this was Sophie's mother. My visitor would be leaving my park. I found I was relieved for her sake and saddened by her absence. I had not felt an interest like this for some time. But I knew this was for the best. The child should be home. Once they left, I thought that was the end of the fascinating golden-haired girl. I tried to put her out of my mind, but sometimes I wondered about her. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I had my next run-in with her. This time, our fate was twisted together forever. I was scavenging for food not far from the park. I tended to not wander too far from the drain that leads to my home. Hidden in the darkness within some bushes, I spotted my golden-haired Sophie. She was sitting on the steps leading up to what appeared to be her home. She was crying. That feeling again crept into my chest. I could hear voices yelling within the home. That must have been her parents. I was curious what would cause these wondrous people to be verbally violent to each other. Sophie's mother stormed out the door, almost tripping on the small girl. She yelled for Sophie to return to the house and wait for her to return. The woman got into her metal carriage and sped away, leaving Sophie alone. Little Sophie wiped her tears on the long sleeve of her shirt and stepped back into the brightly lit home with a fearful look in her eyes. I waited several minutes and then quietly slipped between the bushes and the house. More yelling continued, but this time it was only the male. He was upset, and his speech differed from the others I had heard. It was almost as if he was having difficulty speaking. His speech was slurred, and he had trouble with simple words. I had witnessed some people talking like this late at night in my park. I quickly peered into the window. There I saw the man standing over Sophie. He was drinking from a bottle. I was familiar with the shape and knew the contents tasted bitter. He was drinking it quickly. Between long gulps, he would scream at my poor little Sophie. She stood in the middle of the room, crying. The man seemed to be having trouble standing. The man struck her across her tear-streaked face. I became so enraged that my claws extended from my long fingers without a thought. I growled low in my chest, and I felt my lips peel back from my long sharp teeth. This man hurt her, and I was ready to tear him apart. This feeling of anger, long dormant inside me, wanted to rip open this filthy human. The man must have heard me, for he looked at the window I was peering into. I dropped quickly to the ground and slid under the bushes. I'm not sure if he saw me or not, but the yelling had stopped. When I dared look again, he was asleep on the couch, and Sophie was gone, but my anger was not. My violent reaction had surprised me, for I knew little of this golden-haired girl since she was not of my kind. I should not have felt anger for the male striking her. Yet I did. Memories of tearing human flesh flashed through my mind. I shook the thoughts from my head. That had been long ago. I quietly returned to my little world within the drain, confused about the night's happenings. I was so preoccupied that I had even forgotten to kill and eat one of the other creatures that also dwelled within my world. Hunger had escaped me that night, which rarely happened. I, too, had the eternal hunger that the others were cursed with. After that incident, I would sneak back to that small home whenever the moon was not bright in the sky. Darkness concealed my dark fur well. Eavesdropping at the window, I began to learn about Sophie. The male was not her father. He was a step of some sort. My grasp of their language was not perfect. I had not wanted to learn the human language, even in the olden times. Sophie appeared to be a quiet, obedient child. She was afraid of the male, and the female seemed uninterested in the child's well-being. Whenever I saw the male harm little Sophie, I became angered. I soon plotted. As best I could, I followed the male whenever he would leave at night. He and other males spent time in the forest near my park. They drank the foul liquid from the bottle and disturbed the peaceful woods with their horrid noise. I planned, and I waited. My kind was known for being patient. End of part 1. How far will a monster go for a little human girl? Come back next week to find out. Impatient, dear listener? If so, you can buy the finished novella on hellodearreader.com.
Hope you enjoyed the story. Please like and share. See more stories at hellodearreader.com.